I suppose that most of you know me. I am Cinzia Albanesi, and I'm the president of the European Association of Community Psychology that is organizing this webinar. As you probably know, we have decided with the board that this year our webinar will not only host scholar that are in a senior position, but we wanted to offer the opportunity to share their research to young scholars, because we think that it is a great opportunity for them to have the floor in this kind of situation. But we think that it's also an opportunity for us, because it is true that probably now we are starting back meeting in real live person in conferences and other events. But what sometimes happens in those kind of events is that time is always running, and we think that the webinar thought as places where it's possible maybe to have a more, let's say, relaxed conversation with more time to make questions and to engage into a discussion on the topic that our young scholars are offering for discussion. And today the discussion will be on housing first. That is, and the title of the webinar is A Solution for Eradicating Homelessness in Europe. Homelessness is a problem in Europe, but it's also a global problem. And I'm very happy to have today Branagh Shaughnessy and Marta Gaboardi. Both are postdoctoral researcher, Branagh in Dublin City, while Marta in Padua. And they are working on housing first, and they will present different sides of the work that they did on this topic. And the webinar will start with the contribution from Branagh, and the title of her contribution is Housing First, Europe's Capabilities Enhancing Homeless Service Model. And then afterwards, Marta will present her work with the title Working with People Experiencing Homelessness. And given that, of course, the topic is common between the two presentations, the idea would be to have only, let's say, very specific questions, if needed, at the end of Branagh's presentation, and leave the final part of the webinar for a conversation and a discussion on both presentations. Of course, at the end of the presentation, I think that it would be possible for participants to open their microphones and make questions live. But if, let's say, someone feels more comfortable writing questions in the chat, this would be also okay. So I think that we can start, and I leave the floor to Branagh with a presentation.
Great, and thank you, Cinzia, for introducing me. And good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to share my research with you, which was on housing first as a capability enhancing homeless service model. So I'll start off by giving you some of the background to our approach in these two studies that I'm about to present. So I'll talk to you a bit about the theoretical approach, and then I'll talk to you more generally about homeless service models and the ways that we compare them in the studies. I'll present to you the first study, which was a longitudinal examination, then the qualitative study after that, and I'll sign off with a discussion of what the results meant, what they mean, and then conclude there with some implications. So the two studies I'm about to present are part of a larger project that ran from 2016 to 2020 called Homelessness as Unfairness. And this is funded by the European Commission through the Horizon 2020 programme, who put out a call to generate an empirically informed European theory of justice and fairness. And so what in the Home EU project, we take the concept of chronic and pervasive homelessness as an example of extreme inequality. And we employed multiple perspectives in this project, including that of service users themselves, service providers, members of the public and stakeholders. And so the studies I'll present today concern the service users' perspectives. And this work package was led by the Irish team, by Dr. Ronnie Greenwood, Dr. Rachel Manning and myself. And the overall project incorporated data from 8 different European countries, including Ireland, Italy, Spain, France, Sweden, the Netherlands, Poland, and Portugal. So moving on to the theoretical approach that underlines the two studies I'll present, we use the capabilities approach, which was developed by Marta in the early 80s as an alternative approach for measuring human development. And what abilities are is they are the freedom to be what you want to be and do what you want to do, given the socio-cultural and economic circumstances you are in. And the reason that they are, I suppose, an alternative to GDP and quality of life ratings is that they can incorporate constraints that people experience on their personal freedoms. Measuring gross domestic product or subjective ratings doesn't tend to capture inequalities that exist in our society. And so building on Sen's approach, Martha Nussbaum went on to develop central capabilities. Now, these are the essential elements of a dignified and good life. And she did go so far as to argue that they should be basic human rights, that any just society should at least meet these needs. And so there are 10 dimensions that align with the various aspects of human experience and life. And bodily health, for example, refers to having adequate shelter, good physical health, and being adequately nourished. Bodily autonomy refers to being free from physical, emotional, or sexual violence. Emotions refers to the freedom to experience the full range of human emotions and not to have your emotions blighted by anxiety or depression. And life refers to living, having a lifespan that's expected of you, as opposed to dying prematurely, maybe from illness, for example, that may have been picked up during a stay on the street or during an experience of homelessness. So you can understand how being in a homeless situation really can deprive you of many of these dimensions. And so the idea of homeless services should be really to support somebody in rebuilding their capabilities and rebuilding these aspects of a good and dignified life. I'm going to move on now to talk about the different homeless service models, starting with the traditional approach, which many of you might be familiar with already. So typically when a person falls homeless, they may look for shelter. On presenting themselves at a homeless shelter, they'll be sort of assessed. So typically the reason for their homelessness will be established, and they'll be expected then on entry to the shelter to demonstrate that they're working to address the reason for their homelessness. Shelters tend to differ in the rules and requirements they have. So for example, some shelters will require abstinence from substances and alcohol. Other low threshold shelters will permit people to use substances, granted that they don't endanger anybody else in the setting. Shelters tend to be congregate in nature, so there's many diverse, different people with diverse and complicated needs, various histories of adversity and trauma, all in under one roof. So rules sort of have to be implemented in order to maintain some sort of order and sense of safety. But the problem is that these rules can infringe on people's personal freedoms as well. So typically the system, people tend to bottleneck at the shelter and transitional housing stages. I think research has shown that it takes people about 10 years to progress through this staircase of services. So it doesn't realistically help people in a quick way. People tend, if they do make it out the other end into housing, it comes at a very high price to their wellness, be it physical and mental. So an alternative approach is the Housing First approach, which was developed in the 1990s. It was designed specifically for people with mental illness in mind. The founder of Housing First, Sam Tambaris, noticed in his work as a psychiatrist that somebody he might have met one day and treated in the unit would have ended up on the street a few days later. So there was this revolving door going on and the system just was not working. So Housing First gives people housing upfront. It's literally a streets to homes program. There's no prerequisites placed on anyone, but it is delivered together with tailored, individualized support, often in the form of a multidisciplinary team. And what I mean by that is it could be a team composed of case manager who manages overarching configuration of support. There could be a addictions counselor if the individual wants to work on that. There may be a psychiatric nurse if it's somebody who's dealing with mental health issues. And I suppose the most important thing is the harm reduction aspect of housing. One of the important aspects of Housing First is the harm reduction approach. So in contrast to shelters who may or may not accept you if you're using substances, Housing First will always accept you no matter what stage you are at. And instead of placing requirements on people to abstain from using substances, it will encourage the safer use of substances. So for example, it may involve education about using needles in a safe way or healthier alternatives to a substance that somebody is using. And so finally, I've got to the actual study. So the first study was a longitudinal examination of homeless services capabilities. So we recruited people across the 8 European countries, both from Housing First and from traditional services. So at time 1, we had about 565. Time 2 was roughly 11 months later on average, although there was a variance there. And when we did manage to reach people, we had nearly 400 people at time 2. And so we measured their capabilities across the 10 dimensions with a specially designed measure developed from Sachetto's measure, 2018 measure of capabilities in community mental health settings. We also captured choice. So things like choice would have measured things like, are you able to lock your front door? Can you come and go without notifying people? We measured housing quality and satisfaction with services as well. So in our mediation analysis, we did find a positive relationship between service or program type and capabilities, such that being in Housing First resulted in higher capabilities. And when we incorporated choice and housing quality, there was a mediation relationship. So was the relationship between Housing First and capabilities can be explained by choice and housing quality concurrently. So, the person's freedom to lock their front door and choice over services, together with the quality of their housing, can explain the way that they were able to have better achieved capabilities, bodily health, life, play, and all of that. The second study was, again, an examination of capabilities, but it was qualitative. So we used a subsample from the longitudinal study of 77 participants across the 8 European countries and 37 homeless programs. And we did semi-structured interviews across all of the work packages. And we asked them about their capabilities and how specifically we wanted to know how the services shaped their capabilities, be it affording it or constraining it. So for example, we asked people like, what things do you choose to do that contribute to your health and happiness? What things do you choose to do to improve your personal safety? So you can see how these aligned with different dimensions. And of course, we had to do some translation and back translation. And then we conducted a thematic analysis. So thematic analysis is a way of identifying patterns in the data that best represents what people told us, and also to address our research question, which really was interested in the way services shaped people's capabilities, and as well the kind of comparison between Housing First and traditional services, like what were the different experiences like for people in these different settings. And so the first theme was autonomy and dependency. So for example, people in traditional services perceived an awful lot of rules that kind of govern their everyday life, surveillance and things like that. In Housing First, rules were less of a thing, they were less of an issue. In Housing First, people tend to have kind of normal tenancy agreements. There were normalized rules that any one of us might have with a landlord. there was a transformational impact of home in people's and Housing First participants' accounts. So they really felt they had gone from being, they stuck in sort of a shelter to having their own home, having their own front door. The security of a front door was another sub-theme there. It was really symbolic for people to be able to close their door, to control who entered their domain, and then the sense of security and safety, being able to lock that. The second theme was the relational impact of accommodation. So what we found was that people in Housing First were able to enact important relationships, participate with their family, have their family over for dinner, have their romantic partner live with them. But in traditional services, people didn't have that. There was, for example, one person in France who had a son, but who was ashamed of having their son visit them because they were living in a shelter. The third theme was community interaction and stigma. So, for example, people in shelter settings felt that the community around them, members of the neighborhood, held prejudices about them. That they sort of labeled them as drug users just because they lived in a setting where people would use drugs. Whereas people in Housing First felt more, they could relate to their communities better because they were in a normalized living situation. And so I'll move on to the discussion now of what the findings together mean from the two studies. So to enhance recovery, homeless service users need opportunities to enact self-determination. So what I mean by that is the autonomy and the choice that is associated with Housing First is necessary to help them along the way. The reason for that is because people who are using homeless services need to be allowed to curate their own path, their own recovery path, and to draw from individualized supports to rebuild these essential aspects of a good life. And it's definitely freedom rather than rules and oppression that can foster this process and enable people to progress towards their recovery and housing goals. But it's important to note that it isn't just the idea of issuing housing, providing housing. There definitely needs to be these positive, supportive relationships as well. And that includes, be it with a service provider, but also with family and friends, in order to support having a sense of meaning in one's life. And so finally, the solution to end homelessness is Housing First. The traditional system tends to hold people in homelessness as opposed to actually resolving it. And it can even have unintended negative consequences for people's physical and mental health. What we need is not just an endorsement of Housing First policy, which I think we're progressing towards in a number of European countries. Really, we need, as well as that, as well as at a European level endorsement, we need more public housing. We need more harm reduction orientated policies to homelessness and to health. We need a lot more protection for tenants in terms of their rights. And we need a smooth and good integration of homeless services system together with the health system and the criminal justice system as well. And so I'll sign off for now, and I'll just leave you with this prompt to have a think about what your front door might look like and in comparison to people in less fortunate circumstances. So those are my contact details there. And if you have any kind of clarification or quick questions, I'll take them now. But other than that, we might leave the discussion till the end. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Branagh. Are there quick questions? Eleni asked for the presentation and the papers. Maybe you can put the reference in the chat so people would be able to download them.
Yeah, I do. I have them on the next slide as well.
Okay.
So maybe if we can share the slides.
I have one question to Branagh. Can I ask her?
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Thank you for your very nice presentation. And again, congratulations of your doctoral thesis. But my question is about the differences between the countries, because there was a lot of results. So do you think that in each country you made the research, you saw the same results in terms of capabilities in your qualitative research?
I think there was a lot of diversity, and in the analysis we didn't, although it would have been very interesting to compare the countries, we didn't focus on that. But like, just I suppose I did notice kind of, superficially I would have noticed differences. It wasn't the core of the analysis, but there would have been differences and similarities between some countries. So certainly I know I can remember between Ireland and Italy, there was similarities in terms of housing first participants who had been housed in familiar neighborhoods. And they had chose to do that. Of course, not everyone chooses to do that.
Yes,
But it had a really positive consequences for them in reconnection with others in the community. And then there would have been other differences, like in the Netherlands, bureaucracy was a real challenge for people. There was people who were unemployed and homeless, and who had a job offer. They couldn't accept the job offer because they didn't have an address. But that was kind of unique enough to the Netherlands, and in most of the other countries, that people had been felt supported with the kind of bureaucracy and the administration. And then, of course, in Poland, like there wasn't a housing first program at the time, so we couldn't make the comparison in Poland, but we still used the data from the traditional services side as well. So I think across the service programs across the countries, there would have been similarities. But I wish I knew more about the differences. That's all I can offer you for now.
Thank you for your answer. So we have 2 housing first programs in Poland now.
Great.
After the project. Yeah.
Great news.
Thank you.
Francesca also wanted to make a question or a comment, I suppose.
Yeah, thank you, first of all, Branagh, for your amazing presentation. It's really, really, really interesting project. One question I had, like a curiosity, I would say, it's about like gender differences, and if you happen to find any kind of, especially, I don't know, in the qualitative part, but also maybe in the quantitative one, like differences in terms of like the experiences and views of like participants who self-identify as women, participants who self-identify as men, or I don't know if you had like non-binary queer participants as well. And so yeah, like if you want to comment on that. And the other thing is just a comment, and it's about it. I found very interesting that you stress a lot this dimension of the self-determination and the possibility to have a choice in what is your path. And yeah, and I found that very, very, very interesting and meaningful, this kind of, how this dimension really came up as one of the most significant, right?
Yeah. And
thanks,
Francesca. Thanks. So to address your question about gender, I would need to revisit the quantitative paper now for that, because we packed a lot into that paper. But certain to see if gender was a significant predictor of anything. But certainly with the qualitative study, what did come out in terms of maybe sexual orientation was there was an example of somebody who had been bullied in a homeless shelter setting for their sexual orientation, and that did come out because it's aligned with the capabilities, as opposed to maybe people in Housing First who were able to kind of express their sexuality as they wanted and their identity as they wanted. And then in gender differences, again, I would need to revisit it. But I do know, for example, we did actually, Poland is on the top of my mind now, but there was a lot of Polish sample were people in women's refuges. So they would have had quite a unique experience compared to, for example, maybe the male dominated populations or samples in the homeless shelters. Because, for example, in Ireland, we did recruit participants from a men's shelter. I don't think we had the opportunity to tease that out, but I can definitely appreciate the unique experiences of women and how they do need to be highlighted more. But I think that would be like it would be a new analysis for us to tease that out more.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. No, and I imagine like in shelters, mixed shelters, I mean, I guess there might be a risk for women to be sexually harassed or abused, right? So yeah, that's also what comes to mind. But yeah, thank you.
Maria also wanted to make a question.
Hello, I'm sorry I was late here in crisscross meetings. I'm so sorry, but I'm here. It's also very nice to see Branagh and Marta here. I would like you to address just a quick question on this. Sometimes when we, journals look at these data and see is how hard it is to get this kind of data from people who directly experience homelessness or directly experience these severe challenges in their lives. And would you like to just talk a little bit about the challenges of gathering data at the same time in 8 countries is one kind of challenge, and the extreme difficulty of having people participating from 31 European cities. This is one, and how hard it is to get data from people who actually experience these life challenges. Thank you.
Yeah, hi Maria, it's great to see you. Oh, absolutely. So we would have had a team in each country doing their own data collection according to a protocol that we designed and that had been translated. So then, of course, you have the translation procedure. And then it's multi-city as well as multi-country, like Maria pointed out. So there has to be this sort of coordination between researchers in different locations in order to get that done. And we had huge numbers, like 565 people at time one from 8 countries, different programs, different cities. So a huge amount of communication, the coordination between researchers within their own countries. And then we had to have the cross-country communication as well. We had to retrieve the data, merge the data, clean the data, and lots of back and forth across the research teams about like, how did you code this? And why is that looking like that? And then let alone following up with people again. So we oversample people in traditional services at time one because we expected they would be difficult enough to find at time two because they're, because of the, I suppose, transient nature of being in the homeless service system. And then on top of that, these people are going through, they're in these, in deprivation, and they're going through, sometimes they're in life and death situations, and then you're trying to go in there and ask them to do a survey. But of course, the teams would have all had the experience that's required to navigate that, and would have had the relationships with service providers. So participants were recruited, I might add, through services. So service providers, be it service managers, social workers, psychiatrists, would have sort of been the gatekeepers between us and participants, and that would have helped with the screening process to make sure we're getting people who are able for it, who are able to consent, and who are in a good enough place to participate, and also, but at the same time, incorporating a wide range of diversity within the sample, so we have a representative sample as well. So there was so many moving parts to it. And then it's amazing when you have this paper that's only so many thousand words long, and the amount of sweat and tears that went into it. It's like it didn't do it justice, or even did the reviewers really appreciate us running rings around 8 different countries and different services to try and actually get it in the end. So yeah, it was quite a circus.
Okay, thank you. I think that it's also important to emphasize the challenges that doing research with people that experience very specific situation or that are very vulnerable is really an effort in different sense, and sometimes this requires a lot of engagement and strategy, and it's yeah, it's always a work that require being there and making connection and establishing also trust, because it's not that uncommon that research, let's say, researchers arrive, get their data, and then they leave, and nothing is left for participants. And I think that it's also very important, I think, to give back something to them in terms of how the experience was significant for you, how this was helpful for the policies, but also for the people. So I think that you made some reflection on this. Do you have any comment specific, or want to share some of the challenges with that?
So you mentioned kind of, because the researchers tend to sweep in and get what they need and then sweep out again. What is it that, in what ways can we build relationships, foster trust, and give back? Was that kind of what you were talking about? Yeah. Yeah, I think a little bit of follow-up, a little bit of, because when we design our consent form, and that we do mention, like, you're going to be helping us and contributing to the evidence base. Now, we do compensate people. We did give people gift vouchers. I think it was €20 in Ireland for them to spend for their time. And of course, like, we always expressed how grateful we were. But I think following up with a little bit of, okay, here are our findings. Because we did kind of get to know people, to be honest, because we were following up with them 11 months later. And then the qualitative sample, again, even more, in a richer way, we had a relationship with those people too. And we might check in with them 11 months later. Oh, where are you now? Oh, you got your washing machine fixed, or you're moved out of a traditional service into housing first, which is definitely a positive story. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting to think about those things, and I certainly expect in my future research to see familiar faces again. It brings very rewarding as well, actually, to build these relationships, see people succeed. But I suppose we would stay in touch with the service providers and maintain those relationships, and often we find ourselves in a sort of social exchange with providers. So it may be that they're getting an evaluation, or they're applying for government funding and they need a bit of research done, or they need something written for them. So there is that exchange definitely in the community at the provider level, I think. For service users wise, then it would be nice. I don't think it's done enough for kind of dissemination of, well, this is what we found. Here's like an infographic of our findings. If you're interested in finding out about what you contributed to.
Because I mentioned that because we did an experience with international students. It was a service learning project, and basically the students worked with public service in Cesena that deals with different issues, and one of the issue is housing. It's not a project of housing first. We are not, well, there are projects of housing first also in Cesena, but here it was, let's say, a more general issue about housing people who, let's say, have an housing solution for the moment, but maybe are trying to have a more affordable house and are trying to have the support of the services. Because, for example, in Cesena, one of the issue is it's very difficult to find houses because, well, it is a small city. Maybe who has houses to rent tend to prefer to give them to students, or they want to save them because they are sort of capital of the family that has been built over time. And so we had this meeting, and it happened just yesterday, and the students were trying to explain what they learned from the participants. So they also try to identify solutions and also needs that were shared by the participant. And of course, many of the needs were related to let's say, basic needs, so housing, decent work, and so, but a lot of that came up was about psychological needs, and this is strictly also connected with what you were saying about having relationship places where relationship are possible to be established. And also, I think that what you said, that is freedom in a way is a strong enabler was also something that came up in those conversations. But it was interesting that the participants yesterday, when the students were, let's say, telling the story about what they did, the participants were there, and they were also trying to get input. So they wanted real solution, but they felt that this was also important for them to be invited to be at that moment, because they thought also that this was helpful for, I don't know, discovering new opportunities. And also they felt that those relationships that were established were also in a way more authentic, because they were not just part of the process, but they were involved from the beginning up to the end of it. So I think that definitely this is something that it's very significant. So maybe I think that we can interrupt the discussion for now. I think we will have the chance to go on and maybe take back some of the points that we have already touched. And now I leave the floor to Marta.
Thank you, Cinzia. And I'm so glad to present the results of our social service providers study in the HomeAU project. But I have to aim in this presentation because I'm going to present the results of the study working with people experiencing homelessness and show you the results about the obstacle and facilitators of professional in homeless services and the main differences between housing first and traditional services. But I want also to show you some benefits of using Photovoice method in a cross-national study, and I hope that can be useful also for other research about different topics. So from literature, also in other kind of social services, we know that that both client and providers have to face different barriers and obstacles in the relationship between providers and client, with the organization, but also with the broad social system. And we know from literature that the philosophy and the structure of homeless services may affect the social service providers' values, and these values may affect the recovery of client. But unfortunately, there are few studies about social service providers' perspective and factors affecting their well-being, and we didn't find any standardized tools for the analysis of homeless services. So the main question of our study was, which are the service characteristics affecting social service providers' work with people experiencing homelessness, and which are the main differences between housing first and traditional services. So I'm not explaining the HomeAU project because thank you, Branagh, to give an overview about the project, but we study homelessness in Europe, and this presentation is about the point of view of social service providers. And the main challenges of HomeAU project was to have 8 different languages with different social political contexts, and we want to also to use a methodology that can promote social change at the local, national, but also the European level. So we decided to use the Photovoice method, that is a participatory action research method that captures the positive and negative aspects of a community, such as homeless services, from the point of view of people involved in this contest. And so the social service providers took photographs, and then they discussed the photos in groups. And we use also the photos to influence social policies and also the citizen opinion. We identify 5 main benefits of using this visual language in a cross-national study, because the photographic language is equal and universal and can be an efficient way to communicate across cultures, and also it's flexible, so it can be adapted in different social political contexts. And also the participants share and analyze the photographic data with the researchers in a bottom-up process that allows the co-construction, but also the exploration of new topic, for example, working with people experiences homelessness. And then the Photovoice fosters change, both in participant, but also in the broad community. These were the main steps of our research. So first of all, we designed a detailed protocol about sampling, management and language, and we discussed the protocol among partners. Then we have the implementation of the Photovoice project, the data analysis in 2 steps, and I'm going to present the data analysis and the results. And then we have the dissemination with local exhibitions, but also an European exhibition, photographic exhibition. So in each country, we conducted at least 2 Photovoice projects with 4 weekly or bi-weekly steps. First of all, an introduction and review of the project and training, and the photographic training and assignment. So we asked to such a service provider to answer these 2 main questions through the pictures. So which are the aspects of the program that help your work, and which are the main obstacles? And then they shared and discussed the photo together, and the researcher wrote a report with the main themes identified by the participants. So we involved both the traditional services, such as shelters or transitional housing, and Housing First program. And overall, we conducted 17 projects in Italy, Portugal, Ireland, Spain, Poland, Netherlands, France, and Sweden. And overall, we involved 81 social service providers, 8 Housing First programs, and 9 traditional services. For the data analysis, we have the analysis at the country level, and was a participatory data analysis with the participant of the Photovoice project. Then the researcher wrote a report, and they translate the report into English. And then we conducted the cross-national analysis, and we divided the team identified by the participant in 3 levels: the systemic, the organizational, and the individual level. Overall, we collected 195 pictures. Regarding the results, the providers identified 3 main factors at the systemic level that affect their work. First of all, the institutional arrangement and the importance to influence the policy to have more homeless services, but also the difficulty of working with other services in the community, as Branagh mentioned before, the citizen opinion that affect the work with people experiences homelessness. And at the organizational level, the providers talk about the importance of the cohesion among colleagues and having a shared vision and principles, but also having clear roles, activities, and procedures. And these were the main facilitators of their work, but also they identified the workload as one of the main obstacles. And at the individual level, they talk a lot about the difficulty of working with clients that have different and complex needs and problems, but also the difficulty of balancing the private and work life. I'm going to show you some example of picture. For example, in a Housing First program in Portugal, this provider talk about the importance of influence the political sphere with material collected through a scientific practice, to talk about the relationship with the political level. And at the organizational level, in a Housing First program in France, the providers talk about the importance of the cohesion among colleagues, and in these pictures he said everyone discusses with everyone. It's a moment of informal information sharing, and the teams likes these moments. And another example of the picture is in Italy, in a Housing First program. This provider talk about the importance of finding the right distance between provider and clients. Regarding the differences between Housing First and traditional services, we note that in a Housing First, the providers talk more about the institutional arrangement and the need of training, also because it's a new working model, and maybe they need more training about the principles and the practice in this kind of services. In traditional services, the providers talk about more about the obstacle, for example, the lack of working tools and equipment, but also the obstacle in the relationships with clients. But we found also some similarities. For example, both in Housing First and traditional services, providers identify the citizen opinion as an obstacle, and also the user characteristics. And then they identified the support among colleagues as one of the main facilitators of their work. But we found also some differences between the two models. For example, in Housing First, the providers mention more the facilitator, for example, having a flexible role and sharing responsibilities with the colleagues and also the training. And they say that also that working with clients in their house allows them to work with a future perspective in an environment that respects the client's freedom and choice. Overall, one of the main results of our study is the increasing knowledge about an European vision of homeless services. And the visual language allowed us to observe the similarities and also the differences, because the participants elaborate the themes, and this was one of the benefits, because the cultural significance of the photographs was made explicit and maintained in the cross-national comparison. I'm going to show you an example of similarities. So the same picture for the same theme. For example, in Portugal and Italy, two different providers took the same picture to talk about the difficulty of having a service too far from the city center. Or these two pictures, one in Sweden and one in Netherlands, the providers took the same picture to talk about the workload and the paperwork that may affect also the time that they can spend with the clients. And also we promote also social change with the local exhibition. For example, in Italy, we organize 3 different local photographic exhibitions in the city where we conducted the study. And in particular, in one program, the participants elaborate 4 different proposals for a change at the organizational level. And they share this proposal, for example, the need of having internal communication, the need of have more relationship between providers and volunteers, the need of constant updates on the client's process, and the need of training and psychological supervision of the team. They shared this proposal with the leader of the organization. And when we conducted an interview 1 year later in a follow-up, we note that most of the proposal implemented. So we can use also the Photovoice project to promote social change at the organizational level. And it was a way to reflect about their work. We organized also an European exhibition during the International Conference on Housing First in Padova, where we share the picture from all the countries with the citizens, some local politicians, and other social service providers from different organizations. So these are some of the results. I can share with you also the paper about this study, but I want to give you some conclusion points. So first of all, the importance of analyze the point of view of those who work in the services, not only the client. And also because these results show you how it is important to promote working models such as housing first that help providers work better. And also the study demonstrates the benefit of using photographs in comparative qualitative research across nations, languages, and cultures to try to understand a kind of common European culture of a phenomenon such as homelessness. And moreover, if we allow the workers to do their job to the best of their capacities, we can also improve the quality of care and then the client's outcome. So these are the main article about this, but I hope that also Maria and Branagh can talk about the experience of using the picture with the provider. So thank you.
Thank you, Marta. I think that this also was really stimulating presentation, because I think that, well, at first I can say that I think that Photovoice is really a powerful tool, but I think that is also very significant to focus on the workers, those who work in the services, because sometimes we may forget that in a way, especially when they work in, let's say, in marginal situation, they also tend to be marginalized. And so it can be also quite common that in a way they are forgotten, and at the same time they feel also that their capabilities, to go back to what also Branagh was saying, are challenged or anymore. So I think that this is really important, also because also at the very beginning you mentioned values. And I think this is also a very significant point when you work in this particular situation. And sometimes value are a strong resource for not giving up. But I think that it is something that sometimes services rely too much on. And I think that, as you said, it's very important to provide models that are sustainable and also give back also to the professional that work in the services a role that is even more coherent with what they have been thinking about their work. So definitely, I think this is very important. I think it is also very significant, the fact that I mean, we cannot really think about, I mean, it's not that common, because I think that what you said at the very end, having the opportunity to see that after 1 year, what was identified as improvement or challenges, something was done, and there were opportunities to prove this. And I think that, I mean, we sometimes or quite often discuss about the impact of our work, about prevention, let's say, in a way. And I think that this is very significant sometimes, especially when you work in those situations. People, I'm thinking about some conversation that, for example, I had with the members of NGOs or volunteer organization that are a little bit, let's say, uncomfortable with the idea that they are providing or offering qualitative data, because sometimes they feel that those data are not scientific enough. So they feel what we are producing is not that valuable. So I think that having decided to use a qualitative method, which is participatory in essence, and it's for doing a research that is international, that deals with such an issue, I think it has been a very strong, significant, and important choice, also for the overall meaning that it may have in terms of how we should do research and how we should consider measurement of impact and of change. And probably those were not questions, I would say, but some of the consideration that came up while you were presenting your results.
Thank you. I think that was also an opportunity for the professional to have time to reflect about their work, because in homeless services, most of the providers work in a high emergency situation, and they don't have any time to reflect about why they are doing something or not. So
yeah, and I think that this is a space also that gives meaning, and also is very significant for their well-being, because I was mentioning already the fact that we are working with people that are in the housing services, and we organized some training with them, but basically the training was really thought about sharing experiences. And this was exactly one of the comments, because they said, really what is needed for us is to have time to think about what we are doing, to know about the other experiences, about how to connect different services. And this may seem even strange, I would say, because we were talking about Cesena, which is not a huge city. So one could even imagine that all the people that are working public services know each other, and probably they know each other, but they do not know the work. So really offering a time for that. And I think also with the stimulating power of taking images instead of elaborating significant and articulated thought, this could also be really something new, and offering the chance to develop also new insight.
Thank you. Anna.
Anna?
Yes. I have a question to Marta. Thank you for your very nice presentation, very clear. But my question is related to your research, because you made the group differences comparison. But my question is about longer term effects of the Photovoice method. Do you know research, or do you think about evaluation of the project in longer time?
Yes, we conducted only one follow-up, because it's very difficult to organize another time of the research with the providers for the comment before, so they have always something to do. They don't have any time to reflect about the impact of the research. So we're conducting only one follow-up in Verona, another city in Italy, but not in other countries. But this is one of the main limitations of this study, but in general about using Photovoice, because most of the time, in my opinion, is used as a research method and not as a method to promote social change. So we should do that for sure.
Thanks.
Francesca.
Yeah, thank you, Marta. Very interesting presentation. I mean, both of them were really interesting and also complemented each other. So it was really great to have both of you together. Yeah, I mean, kind of the same question that I asked to Branagh, I would like to ask to you if, like, working with service providers, did you notice any kind of gender difference in terms of like the experiences of like of those who work in this kind of services, so like providing support to homeless people? And yeah, I mean, and I don't know, even at the local level, so like even in Italy, if you, I imagine it's more difficult to kind of maybe discuss other national context findings about, like, for example, in your own context. And so like in terms of the participants you work with directly, did you notice any kind of gender dimension?
Yeah, that's a good question, but most of the participants were female. So I think 60%. So we can suppose main difference, but I think, and I surprised that the female that we involved in our research didn't talk about the feeling unsafe, because most of the people experiencing homelessness are men and most of the professionals are women. I was a social service provider before starting my PhD, so I can give you my experience, but it was very difficult sometimes because you can feel very unsafe, especially when you work in a shelter. Maybe you are alone with 60 or 100 clients and you have to manage everything alone, and you are a female with a lot of men. So I think that this is one of the main differences. But I'd like to conduct more research about the burnout and the influence of service characteristics on providers' well-being, and trying to find if there are some differences between women and male and female, or people who identify in another gender. So.
Yeah, thank you. That's interesting.
I don't know if Hannah, Maria, or Branagh know difference, because also in the Photovoice project, the participants identified the teams together. So maybe we lost some differences in the groups.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. You said before we should probably, let's say, start using Photovoice as a tool for change, not only a tool for research. And let's say, oh, I think it's a good suggestion, but I was wondering if you thought about the implication about how to do it. Because I think that this may be very, very powerful. So
yeah. I think that not all the research in our HomeAU project were familiar with this methodology. So that's one of the main lessons that we learn in this process. And maybe we should conduct more workshop, for example, before starting the Photovoice project, to talk about the principles of this methodology. This should be useful for next research in the future. And we are researchers, so we want to know the topics, and it's more difficult to help the professional in the process of social change. So it's one of the main challenges that we underline also in our paper about using Photovoice in cross-national research. So.
Okay, Maria.
No, thank you. Following our previous comments and a comment that Francesca wrote in the chat about the tendency for the exploitative nature of research, I think that what the lessons we learned from Photovoice is that the additional effort for transformation and devolution of the data to those who provided them is that they have a reflexive opportunity, and the exhibitions provide an exchange opportunity for those who participated in the projects and for other audiences. So the interface that the Photovoice provides as a tool for change is quite interesting. If we as researchers are able to exploit that, exploit the result, not exploit the people, but exploit the result in terms of generating discussion with it. And I think most of the change is about us also getting back to people. And the Photovoice facilitates our work, because it's really not our expression of the data, of how we interpreted the data, but how the people themselves interpreted those data. So we are just the vehicle, the transporters of those data. And so I think that is why the Photovoice, not only for a social change for professionals, but actually to contrast the priorities of people. If we knew then what we know today, we might have done also a Photovoice project with service users to contrast those visions. So we got more ideas of things that we didn't do that we could have done, but that is for another war, another series of research efforts, because I think now we are more prepared to challenging research, and I think we need to be challenged ourselves in terms of what we can do with the research we have in our hands. For instance, one of the great debates I'm now starting to entail after the experience of this project is that we need to publish in our own languages. Those who are primarily English speakers, the Italian team made a wonderful video for dissemination of the results, which was a very good video. And we need to publish in our own national languages in order to potentiate the results of these projects. So we need to work more on this dichotomies of what research brings us in terms of the high quality, the standards, but also the effort of the devolution. And I think that is a particular challenge for community psychology, because we have this concern of using our work for social transformation. So languages is one of the aspects in which we can actually promote devolution of our data. Because I have the experience of using the HomeEU products for professional training. You know, what they say is that they read the articles, but they don't understand them. They really don't understand the amplitude, the thought behind. They read the English, but they stay in the English, but they do not reflect on what they have learned from that. So, and that is quite challenging for those who we give our best, as Branagh said, that the reviewers don't see the whole point because of how hard this was to get. But also in this devolution effort, we might think of different ways, particular for us, those who speak the languages of the South, that are the south of Europe that are less present in the publications. We do have some, but it's very scarce. But we need to have more, and so that's another effort for devolution. So I think this comment by Francesca about the exploitative nature of it's quite provocative, but we should think about that as community psychologists. How are we doing this or not? So, and it's a good question for our own research. To what extent am I just completing the tasks for the research itself? At what point am I working on devolution? And devolution should be a quality indicator. Our devolution capacity should be a quality indicator of our work.
Yeah, and regarding, thank you, Maria, sorry, but regarding the dissemination of the OMEU results, it was very useful to have the local photographic exhibition because it was also an opportunity to talk with citizens. So also Branagh talked about the prejudice, the stigma that people have about people experiences homelessness, but also about the shelter. And sometimes in the city where we organize the exhibition, some citizens say, oh, I didn't know that there was a shelter in my city. So what is? It was an opportunity to talk with citizens about this invisible service, but also invisible topics sometimes.
Yeah. Okay, good. Francesca?
Yeah, no, just to follow up on what Maria Jo was saying, that I agree very much with her. And two things. One is that, for example, quite interestingly, in the UK context, and I don't know if Branagh had similar experience, but definitely like in the UK we have, it starts to be very valued as like a key indicator in terms of like university success, and also like researchers assess the impact, so-called community impact, which is not about like your the publication record, but it's really about like the policy or community impact you are able to make through your research. So like engagement with like, I don't know, newspapers or kind of like very visible online platforms, or being able to, I don't know, through different means, different kind of methodologies to engage with either policymakers or community. For us, I guess, for me, but also for us, I guess it's, I mean, both are important, but yeah, and it has become a key indicator. So that's something interesting. I know in Southern Europe, it's still not considered. Maybe as like my impression is that things starts usually more in the northern kind of hemisphere, and then gradually get to also southern countries, possibly in the next few years, might become something really important. This is the first reflection. The second one is that exactly for what you were saying, and maybe like in the future, it might be something to share with you in a ECPA kind of session, but I've started to work now on a short animated video, and it is exactly for these reasons, these considerations we were discussing, because I had my funding, and of course I also work on a very kind of invisibilized topic, also like very controversial and problematic, which is immigration detention. And so how to like make these fundings accessible outside academia and to like the general public, to wider community, so that you can also produce some impact, for example, in terms of like change in public opinions, in terms of like education of younger generations, in terms of like a different kind of level of advocacy also. And so that's why we're working on this project, which is really interesting, that the idea is to produce this video on Creative Commons so that everyone then can use for like this kind of purposes. So I think that's a really important conversation to have. And maybe we can exchange ideas and experiences and strategies also for the future.
Yeah, I jump in because I think that this is a very significant part of our work. And it is true that probably in some countries, this is more strongly emphasized also in the activity of researcher. I'm also thinking about some good practices because, for example, the Journal of Community and Applied Social Psychology asks us also not only, let's say, to provide the paper peer-reviewed with all the scientific criteria, but also to offer policy statement or statement that can be used to inform and be shared with the community. So the idea is really also, I think it's really valuable, this effort that comes from a scientific journal to offer a different way of sharing the result of scientific research. At the same time, I think that what Francesca was emphasizing in terms of the relevance of impact of our research, in a way is also comes from a top-down process. Basically, because, for example, the impact dimension is becoming more and more significant in all European founded research. And also the university are now putting an emphasis, as this is also common, I would say, in South Europe, not only in North Europe, on the third mission and public engagement. And one of the dimensions of public engagement that connect with what Maria is saying is that, for example, publishing in your own language and publishing with different aims and in order to reach different targets is something that start to be at least acknowledged. I'm not saying that this is changing the career of academics. This is not happening yet. I don't know if this is going to happen in how long. Definitely, this is something that is significant and is becoming part of something that I think until maybe 5 years ago was not even mentioned. So I think that this is a significant change, and we can really probably give a push in that direction, because this is part also, I think, of what we in a way try to do in our work. Of course, we are a researcher, we need to publish, otherwise we perish, but it's only a symbolic death, while for other having key information and suggestion and strategies is sometimes it's really a matter of life in the serious and not in a symbolic way. Marta, do you want to enter in this conversation?
No, yeah, I was thinking about I think that we did a great job with the OMEU project in this direction, because every time that we finish a study, we try to translate our results in our native language, in English, but also in a way that was accessible to different targets. And we try to translate the results in policy guidelines, European policy guidelines, and that the European project in general gave this great opportunity.
Okay, any other comment?
Thank you for this discussion. It was very useful. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that we can come to the end. It was really interesting. I think it was also nice to have this conversation on different implications of our work, both in terms of how do we think and perform research, which space are we able to allow for change, which space are we able to give back to the community and in order to have an impact. So I think that these are very, very important dimension of our work. And I think that, I do agree with Marta that the job that you did, the methodological choices that you made also at the very beginning of the project represent really a strength, and can really also give support to open also different way to work with the large cross-national project. Because I think that, yes, there is more space for qualitative research. There is more space for, I don't know, using visual methods or art, but it's not yet that common that a cross-national project relies so strongly on this kind of methods. So I think that this could be really significant and in its own as an impact in terms of how we approach research. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
And I hope to see
Thank you.
early at our next webinars, but also in Naples, where we will have our General Assembly, where we will assign the awards. Is it possible for you to participate? So really, I hope that we will have the chance to see each other very early and to go on with our works. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.